Revolts in EU4 occur when your country does things that are considered bad by the local population. Innocent things like decreasing autonomy, having a chronic -3 stability rate, or making a small... We'll go with small. There are hence two ways of dealing with such a revolt. The honourable way, where your troops meet with the rebels in a pitched battle, and the heat of battle itself dictates the outcome of court and country. Or something grandiose. I don't know, I may have got something carried away. But there is another way of dealing with these revolts too. They say the pen is mightier than the sword. But personally, I'm not too convinced she didn't do too well in the elections. Kind of lost to deserve. However, we can certainly try this tactic in EU4. After all, if we sign enough bills of rights, increase our stability, and also go form like 15 countries or something equally stupid, sure we'll be able to convince everyone that actually unrest is bad, and they should just stay home. Disclaimers. Oh boy, is this section going to be big today? Woo! First things first, we're looking at national unrest. The modifier visible here. This means that things that very much do affect your unrest, but don't do so in a direct fashion, aka in a way that affects this counter here, such as +15 unrest from being overextended, or local increases to unrest or decreases to set unrest from certain events, are not going to be counted here. Furthermore, we'll also not be looking at any unrest reduction, but only while in a disaster type modifiers. Yes, you could technically go into a peasant's war and stay in it forever and actually have less unrest by just being in a constant state of appeasement towards those peasants, while they reciprocate your state of appeasement by sending thousands of their own peasants to a senseless death against your armed forces. And yes, it's technically possible to maintain the state forever, but due to ideological reasons, desires to not be in a constant state of disaster, oh sorry, wrong image there, we're not going to be counting tactics such as constant peasants' wars as valid options for this run. Furthermore, another thing that we're not going to be looking at today, but actually is very important in any runs you're doing at home, is tolerance modifiers. If we have 3 tolerance of the true faith, as well as 3 tolerance of heretics and heathens, for example, since every province in the game has to be either true faith, or heathen, or heretic, they will get a -3 unrest reduction, regardless of their religion. However, it's something that we're not looking at today, as this changes the setup to also include stacking tolerance of true faith modifiers and performing one faith. It's also important to recognize that tolerance of the true faith operates on a different dimension, as it were, to these global unrest modifier here. For example, for disasters such as Docile Country, your national unrest needs to be positive, but if you have +15 tolerance to the true faith and every province is your religion, you don't need to get another +15 unrest to trigger your disaster. As such, while in practice I would say going for the one faith and converting everything to your religion is the way to go, in this modifier stacking run, I'm only going to be looking at sources of global unrest reduction. With that all said and done, let's get into the video. We have 2 modifiers here today, temporary global unrest reduction and permanent global unrest reduction. From a purely practical point of view, the permanent reductions are even more useful than always. And the temporary reductions, while interesting, do suffer from the problem that compared to normal, where you can say, this is the highest the modifier can go. In our case, that's not true. Since on a province level, we can start throwing things like recent uprising, -100%, and of course tolerance for religions, and other things like that into the mix. Either way, I still find it personally interesting, so I hope you do too. With that said, I have 2 counters, so I'm going to be pressing. And you have 2 counters too, the like button counter and the sub button counter, so if you haven't had a chance to increase those, that would be appreciated. Regardless, enough to self-shilling. Let's begin in earnest. And today's run is going to be insanely painful. And like most things that are very painful, we're going to start in Korea. First thing you want to do is immediately go into debt, as this will allow us to go to the decisions and create the Sinmun office. This is going to give us -1 unrest and -5% stab cost until the end of the game. Introduce the Hangul alphabet. So far so good, isn't it? Yeah, we've got the Hangul alphabet. But then we're going to go ahead and revoke it. To do so, we are going to need to die, so make sure we revoke it. And there we go, we have revoked the Hangul alphabet. That's going to increase our tech cost, sure, but it's going to give us -1 unrest until the end of the game. Now, we're almost done with Korea, and we've already got quite a bit of unrest stacked up, but there's another thing we can do. We need to go ahead and pop the mission Korean Self-Reliance to get Korea in balance until the end of the game. We need to get this done actually by 1600. This is because one of the missions, well, not missions, events we get later is England requires it to be before 1600 so that the event can fire. So we need to make sure we've got this sorted by 1600. But it's going to give us -2 unrest until the end of the game. So far so good. Now we're off to a very fascinating place. We need to go ahead and form Romania. We don't really care about traditions and ambitions for now, but Romania is formed for a very interesting reason. See, Romania doesn't have a real mission tree. Well, it does have a couple of missions. In fact, we're going to get one of these missions. Namely, we're going to be looking at conquering South Slovenia for -2 unrest for 20 years as a temporary modifier. But what's important about the Romanian missions is that they don't count as real missions. So when we form a country with the quote-unquote generic missions, in our case, Somalia, something interesting is going to happen. We're going to get access to the generic mission tree, which is going to have the slave trade mission, which we need to pop to get -3 unrest for 20 years from abolitionism. And then we begin our fun journey of nation forming and tag switching even more than earnest. Because our next stop is Mongolia, as you may have guessed by the fact you're looking at the moment, because we need to go ahead and get the mission Pax Mongolia for -3 national unrest until the end of the game, after wishing to go ahead and form England. Now, technically England can be formed before Mongolia. We need to do the reset our missions trick with Romania into the any African tag so for that mission. But in theory, we can do England, then reset our missions with Romania. Any other tactic like that would work. In essence, we could have formed England earlier, but we need to make sure we form England by 1600. See, the reason for forming England for 1600 is for this event here, the Court of the Star Chamber. Now, this can pop anywhere from 1470 to 1600s. And of course, we're going to need one. It's going to make our stability a bit more expensive, however, it's going to give us -1 unrest at the end of the game. But we're not done with England. We also need to go ahead and renovate Oxbridge. This is going to give us the Oxford Symposium events on a mini timer. One of those events is going to give us -1 unrest, so get that one. The other thing to bear in mind is England has a unique jousting tournament event for -2 unrest, so also get that. Unfortunately, that one is temporary. Next, our formables are nowhere near done. We need to form Switzerland and expand the Confederacy to include Swabia for -2 unrest for 20 years. Then we need to go ahead and form Austria. It has 2 -1 unrest missions. The first one is the King of Poland for -1 unrest, and the Duchy of Bavaria, which will give you access to pure Bavarian beer for 20 years for -1 unrest. This is of course rather ironic because we'll be going Sunni later. But after that, we're off to Georgia because there's 2 missions. First of all, we can get secured succession for -1 unrest for just 10 years, so now our window of temporary modifiers has shrunk even more. And then we get a rather annoying mission. See, the Patriarch of all Georgia gives us access to the icon of Eleusia, which we can pop for 20 years. It's going to give us -1.5 national unrest, not -1. This 0.5 is really annoying because that messes up my count, so I'm actually going to count this as -1 and set a little reminder on my notes to include that 0.5 at the end. Then we move on to the Mamluks, because of course we do. Now the Mamluks have quite a lot of things going for them. First of all, we can get some large festivals for -2 unrest. I'm not actually sure where that comes from, but it exists, and it requires being a Mamluk, so it's probably some event you get. Honestly, I've spent a while trying to find the source of these large festivals. Can't find it. And on the topic of things I can't find, the next one I can't find either. You need to crush some non-Mamluk rebels for another -1 from an event modifier. I, for the life of me, cannot find where this is from. I'm going to include it because previous times when I haven't found the source for a modifier, people have found it for me in the comments. I'm assuming it's not depreciated. Paradox tends to not really take content out of their game, but again, I cannot for the life of me find the source of this unrest reduction from both these Mamluk large festivals and crushing non-Mamluk rebels. But what I can, however, find is one of the old Mamluk missions. You can pacify the Bedouins for -2 unrest. Unfortunately, we don't count disabling DLC here, and this mission no longer is with us, so that's -2 unrest we cannot include in our count. But after we're done with the Mamluks, we need to go ahead and make a pit stop at Tunis. The Tunis is able to pacify the Berbers to get -2 unrest for 20 years. Ireland. Woo! Now, very important with Ireland, make sure you actually take the Irish ideas. We're not forming Ireland for any missions here, we're forming Ireland for the -2 unrest. The reason we're doing Ireland compared to any other country is that Ireland is not an end tag, allowing us to form other countries later, but it also allows us to flip our ideas into a -2 unrest here. I'm not going to be counting this -2 unrest yet, I'm going to count it when we actually complete all of our ideas and policies. But then go ahead and form Scotland for the College of Justice, giving you -2 unrest for 20 years. After which, you're off to Poland, and oh dear lord, what a mess of a mission tree this is. Half the things are locked missions and branching missions, and I have no idea what half of this stuff is. However, regardless of all of that, the thing with Poland is there is a -2 national arrest from Polish ambition somewhere here. Honestly, good luck finding it. I've spent another hour trying to find this event modifier on alone, and I've realised it's probably a better use of my time, unironically playing the actual game. So it's in here. If you find the source of Polish ambition, all the power to you, but I can't. Now we're off to do something a bit more fun and wacky. We need to either become a trade league owner or become an OPM and join a trade league, as this will give us access to 2 events. First of all, we're going to spot some pirates, and then if we let that pirate go, for information and give him some money, we'll be able to find even more pirates, and we can arrest those pirates and get -2 unrest for 20 years. Next, it's time to go ahead and embrace our one true faith, Sunni, because of course. With Sunni, we'll be able to denounce sect practices for -1 unrest until our state religion changes, which is quite nice. But we'll also be able to ban coffee houses for -1 unrest and get another event for purification from unjust taxation for another -1 unrest. Then get the Council of the People for -2 unrest. And we get to a weird one. We need to go ahead and then own Rome. See, I'm sure you've all seen the event that one of your provinces has been sacked, and usually that's one of these forts and you get a bunch of devastation on it and no one's really happy, but you know, that's just how wars go. Provinces get sacked. Well, you need one of the AIs to sack Rome, and when that happens, you need to take the final option to go and raid the Curia treasury. And when that happens, you'll be able to go ahead and say, wow, that's really sad, and get -2 unrest for 20 years. And after that, we finally move on to the end tag, which is Russia, because of course it's Russia. Make sure to not take Russian ideas, you need the old Irish ideas. And oh boy is it bad. See, Russia's already had a couple of DLCs of combining things on top of each other, and this is where it really comes to shine. First things first, we're gonna get some events about insurfing the peasants. We're going to insurf the peasants. This is going to give us -1 unrest. We're also going to get autonomous provinces for another -1 unrest. Now, these are old Russian mechanics. They may not be around today. I could again not verify them. As you may have noticed, genuinely around 75% of the video creation of this video has been trying to find the source of these modifiers, and in many cases not been able to find them. In some cases I haven't actually been able to find them, in the case of some of the missions and ideas, but for things like these, which are old Russian events and missions, I just haven't been able to find them. I'm going to include them nonetheless, and if you can prove that they don't exist, well, in your personal headcanon, you can take them off the counter. I'm going to put them on here because I spent way too long trying to find them. As you can see, that the unrest stacking has definitely made me not want to revolt ever again. But regardless, we've insurfed the peasants for -1, we've got our autonomous provinces for -1. Then we can restrict that serfdom for another -1, because that's a separate thing, of course. Then we can also go ahead and get the Russian vodka sales event. This is now 4 events that I've just found the modifier for, and I have no idea where they actually come from. But one thing I do know, however, is the Russian vodka sales government reform. With that, I'm going to include in the government reforms later. I'm not going to include it on the counter now, but that's just another thing that we at least do have access to. What we do, however, get until the death of our ruler, which is the second modifier, unlike the consort thing for the death until ruler, is going to be Unifier of Russia for -3 unrest. We're also then able to handle the boyars to get -2 unrest for 25 years. Now, that one took me forever to find. That was another half an hour goose chase until I realized, oh yeah, it's a mission modifier stored in the event file. Thank you, Paradox, very cool. But one again I couldn't find is apparently Rising Russian Power, which exists somewhere, I don't know where. Anyway, that's enough complaining about Russian secret unrest reduction modifiers. Next, we need to go ahead and import chocolate, coffee and tea for -3 unrest total. Each one of these events is going to give us -1. And then we need to go ahead and trade wine, so that we can get the excellent vintage event for -1 unrest. Then, relatively simple stuff, get 3 stability for -3 unrest. We are going to be staying as a monarchy here for -2 unrest. But here's another fun thing we need to go, is flip back to Korean, because we need to get back to the original Korean government reform. See, if our primary culture is Korean, we're able to take the government reform Hermit Kingdom, which is going to give us access to, on the government tab, either the expansion, outward, or inward focuses, and with the inward focus, we'll be able to get -2 unrest. Make sure your ruler is just, make sure you get a theologian advisor, and finally, and very simply, go ahead and revoke the HRE. Oh, I hope you've been doing that earlier, because when you do revoke the HRE and form the HRE as your final end tag of your Russia primary culture Korean government, you'll get this massive modifier here, which also includes -2 unrest. Again, the HRE government type is cool, but we need to go ahead and flip out of that back into our Korean primary culture government for that -2 unrest. Then, let's talk government reforms. At tier 8, you'll have access to the Vodka of the Crown government reform, available because you are Russia and popped a mission. And finally, at tier 9, either take the social contract for -1 unrest, or become the I'm not reading that much French for -1 unrest. But we're pretty much done. Just one thing left, our ideas. For those, you need to go ahead and take Horde, which includes -1 national unrest here, Humanist, which has -2 national unrest here, Plutocratic for -1 unrest, because of course, Espionage, so that you can get a spy to try and find my will to live, Divine for -2 unrest, Religious, because at this point even I'm out of joke, and Offensive. Spoken get more from the policies, namely, Calming the Tides for -2 unrest, the Liberation Act for -1 unrest, and Cultural Understanding for another -1 unrest, giving us a further -4 unrest from policies. But with our ideas completed, we can also include the -2 from the Irish ideas, and finally end this with the 0.5 that we didn't add earlier from Georgia. Going through this, trying to find all the sources of this weirdest national unrest, seeing which ones you couldn't, seeing which ones you can. There were like 4 countries that were very much in contention for final end tag. Just genuinely snapped the life out of me. Out of every single modifier I've stacked before, nothing has been as disappointing as squeezing out -1 unrest, when I could just think about how really it didn't matter. Don't do this at home, kids. Terrible idea. But anyway, I hope my sub-rank has been at least good enough for your amusement. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you next one. Goodbye.